Amazon announced today that it's cutting 14,000 corporate jobs, though leaked reports from yesterday suggest the true number is going to be closer to 30,000. Now, management of the company says they need to streamline operations to better leverage AI, but the timing and the macroeconomic conditions and headwinds suggest otherwise. There's a reason why U.S. consumers believe the U.S. economy is in recession right now, and it's because despite the fact that layoffs like Amazon's are relatively scarce, unemployment continues to pile up, as does the confirmation for it. And of course, these are yet more reasons for the Federal Reserve to continue getting out of the way of the market and the bull steepening curve by cutting its policy rates again tomorrow. The vastly more important macro implications are being described by Americans themselves. The Conference Board survey results for October, which just came out today, slid yet again with its future expectations component going even further below its own recession threshold. Why? The outlook for jobs remains grim, and for very good reason, as we're being reminded today by Amazon. And that point was echoed and then some by the University of Michigan's October consumer confidence results. Expectations for that one are right back at their April lows despite the ongoing surge in stock prices. Consumers are no longer seeing stocks as representing the true economic picture like they're told to and otherwise usually do, because stocks do not represent the economy. And the Conference Board also said that holiday spending plans are down significantly from last year, which I'm sure had absolutely nothing to do with Amazon's layoffs, nor maybe what happened at Prime Days earlier this month. The truth is, we are seeing confirmation, even though we don't have the government reports and the government data because of the shutdown, we are getting confirmation that we are indeed in a no hire, some firing environment, which means some degree of flat beverage. And as I said, we keep getting more and more confirmation as we go further along, including from consumers themselves. So late yesterday, Reuters reported that Amazon was going to announce 30,000 job losses. And CNBC a little bit later confirmed the Reuters news, apparently using its own sources. So going to CNBC here, Amazon is preparing to announce sweeping job cuts beginning Tuesday. Today, CNBC has learned the layoffs will amount to the largest reductions in Amazon's corporate workforce in the company's history, spanning almost every business, according to a person familiar with the matter who asked not to be named because the details are confidential. Amazon is expected to begin informing employees of the layoffs via email Tuesday morning. This morning, the person said. The company plans to lay off as many as 30,000 staffers across its corporate workforce, according to Reuters, which first reported the news. And then earlier this morning, Amazon instead said it was cutting 14,000, not necessarily 30,000. But what was left unsaid was whether this was just the first phase of the layoffs, which seems highly likely given the information that's been supplied here. Maybe Amazon intended to announce the entire 30,000 today and decided to scale the number down to avoid some backlash after the earlier leaks. Or maybe those sources cited by multiple reports were talking about the full intentions beyond the first 14,000. Either way, there's a lot of job cuts coming from the country's largest private employer. And out of the roughly 1.5 million workers, 350,000 of them are on the corporate side. So we're talking about a large segment of those jobs. And Amazon itself sent out the usual bland corporate speak statement, which referenced leveraging AI technology and being better positioned to do so by, quote, having the right structure to drive that level of speed and ownership. And that they keep using that term ownership a lot, which is really odd, but not surprising given the corporate reality here. They're talking about having employees, quote, increasing ownership of their jobs, certainly not the actual company. But regardless of all that, there's a dirty truth to Amazon that no one talks about. In fact, if you look at the company's headcounts through the years, what you find straight away is forgot how to grow. And specifically in this case, forgot how to hire, that is now more frequently remembering how to fire, even if on a smaller scale than people might imagine when the term recession gets tossed around. Amazon experienced rapid growth through the 2010s, contrary to the rest of the economy, the silent depression. But by the end of the decade, the company had grown from 34,000 employees to 800,000 as it took over e-commerce. But then once the pandemic hit and everyone shopped from home with Uncle Sam's borrowed money, by 2021, Amazon's workforce had doubled to 1.6 million in just a couple years. But notice what has happened since then. Starting with 2022's Forgot How to Grow, Amazon stopped hiring and has been actually firing a little bit here and there ever since then. Why? Is it because they knew the company was going to need to be streamlined for AI in the years ahead? No. They quite obviously staffed up in 2020 and 2021 expecting volume growth and that the good times were going to continue well into the future. Where did they get that idea? They never once thought there would be an economic stall in 2022, that the world would somehow forget how to grow. They were lured in like everyone by the price illusion, thinking that inflation, or what everyone called inflation, actually represented a real recovery rather than the basic imbalance between supply and demand. So instead of continuing to grow and inflate, the global and U.S. economy instead stalled, leaving Amazon and a whole bunch of other businesses with more workers than they really needed. So they naturally stopped hiring. They didn't really forget how to hire any more than the economy forgot how to grow. It was simply the end of the supply shock's price illusion, which meant there was no longer need to hire more people back because there was no work for them to do. For Amazon, they've actually been shrinking since then. And remember, sideways is contraction. It's a perfect encapsulation of the forgot how to grow recession from the nation's largest private employer. What is a Eurodollar University membership? It's where understanding the monetary world isn't a mystery, it's a method. If you're serious about your financial education and you want clarity in a world of volatility and misunderstanding, this is for you. Mainstream education has left so many gaps on the most foundational concepts, making sense of everything is practically impossible otherwise. With our memberships, we'll fill in everything that you've been missing. Whether you're starting out or sharpening your edge, our memberships scale with your goals. At Eurodollar University, we teach you about how money really works so that you can evaluate fundamentals and make grounded decisions. With a Eurodollar University membership, you get a comprehensive library of foundational and advanced lectures, in-depth case studies and real-world analyses, live Q&A sessions, regular updates on macro trends and even some central bank policies. And most important, how to interpret critical derivative market signals you will not find anywhere else. You can't be in position to succeed if you don't know how it all really works and fits together. So if you're ready to explore, master monetary systems, both past and future, with structure, clarity, and confidence. Click the link in the description to visit eurodollar.university/memberships to join us today. Now, with even more layoffs heading into 2026, it's more confirmation that the no hiring, no firing labor market has shifted to no hiring and some firing, which is the flat part of the beverage curve. And it's enough, even though we don't have widespread layoffs, and this is not all that frequent, it's more than enough to raise unemployment, and consumers know it. So while we don't have the BLS payroll reports and have no idea when we might get them, we get other sources like ADP, which has supplied some labor data in lieu of everything else, including JOLTS, which is another important one that we're missing. Last month, the paycheck processor said that jobs had declined in September for the second straight month and for the third month out of the last 4. Now, the company won't put out its full October series until November 5th. However, it has started to release weekly estimates. And for this month, October, they show an average gain of just 14,000, roughly implying a monthly increase of about 50,000. Well, that's better than another contraction, which would have been the third in a row. Plus 50, if that's what it comes out to be, doesn't actually change anything. It is still a no hiring, some firing position on the flat beverage curve. And we expect it being on the flat beverage curve, this kind of back and forth close to the zero level. So if the 50,000 or so holds for October, that would put ADP's 6-month average at just 30,000, which is slightly higher than September's 12,000, but not materially different. That's definitely a meaningful change from late last year, the artificial high due to tariff distortions, or even last summer when the labor market shook up the markets as well as Jay Powell and forced them back into the Pringles can. Now, one of the best pieces of confirmation that we have outside of these government numbers is, as I said, from consumers themselves. And earlier today, we got the consumer sentiment report for October from the Conference Board. Now, Now, government numbers can be noisy, especially on a high-frequency basis, but so too can consumer confidence. But when you put those two together, it tends to filter out some of the randomness and unrelated factors. The labor data that we have indicates, as I keep saying, no hiring and some firing, and that's what consumers say they're experiencing right now, only that they fear the some hiring becomes a lot more hiring in the not-too-distant future. In other words, consumers are looking down the flat part of the beverage curve too. And what the Conference Board reported was for October, another drop in their overall index back toward the April lows, the October index at 94.6, which is another theme that's being picked up across all these major sentiment surveys. After a rebound with stocks entering the summer, everything has been rolling over since then, from confidence to net jobs. And as I said last year, summertime is the time for recession. And this summer, Americans could not agree more. From the board's press release, the expectations index, which is based on consumer short-term outlook for income, business, and labor market conditions, declined by 2.9 points to 71.5. Expectations have been below the threshold of 80 that typically signals a recession ahead ever since February of 2025. And notice that's the same time frame that we've seen bull steepening in the yield curve. Since February 2025, we've gotten more and more consistent bull steepening in the yield curve, even as the mainstream kept going on about sell Americans, rejection of treasuries, and all that other related nonsense. Instead, consumers, like the markets, not stocks, have suggested the economic conditions have continued to get worse throughout the months since then. And the board also said the number of respondents who think the economy is already in a recession in October rose for the third straight month, even if the amount of those who worry there will be a recession over the next year dips slightly at the same time. The problem is workers as consumers can see what's happening with jobs, and they now agree with Jay Powell that Powell has been forced to drop his solid labor market shtick. So back to the Conference Board. Consumers' view of current business conditions inched upward, while their appraisal of current job availability improved for the first time since December 2024, and it was a minimal increase. On the other hand, though, all three components of the expectations index weakened somewhat, and consumers were a bit more pessimistic about future job availability and future business conditions, while optimism about future income retreated slightly. And one last piece of information that I'm sure played no part and no role in Amazon's decision to start announcing broader layoffs. With this overall dour consumer assessment of employment conditions, Americans are thinking very seriously about cutting back on Christmas purchases. Going back to the Conference Board one more time. Preliminary data suggests that consumers' holiday spending will be down this season compared to last year. Notably, consumers expect to spend 3.9% less on gifts and 12% less on non-gifts, all of that in nominal terms. When asked what will be driving their spending decisions over the upcoming holidays, consumers most frequently cited promotions and getting the most out of every dollar. They're impoverished. They're falling further behind. And with employment conditions being what they are, they know it and they feel it. In addition to promotions, consumers also indicated that they will be likely to buy fewer goods if the price of imported items is inflated by tariffs, which means that companies can't inflate the prices of their goods. There is no tariff inflation because the weak economy. And the University of Michigan's closely followed consumer sentiment results go even farther than the Conference Board's, particularly where it comes to future outlooks among Americans. First off, the revised sentiment from Michigan for October was just 53.6, which is down from 55.1 in September. That's only 1.4 points off the April and May lows, and it's down a whopping 17 points from last October when rate cuts were all the positivity rage. And you can see how that one increased a little with the stock market rebound from the April lows before consumers turned negative, even if equities refused to see anything but AI and trade deals. But the greatest concern here, though, is the utterly negative expectations index. That one now sits at just 50.3, also very close to the earlier 2025 low point. And it's also nearly 25 points below at last October, and at 50.3, it's still among the lows in the entire series. Just to give you some reference, Michigan's expectations index low, the low point during the Great Not Recession, was 49.2 in June of 2008. Sentiment didn't much move from there over the next 9 months as job losses were stacked up by the monetary crash. And going back one cycle further, this index never even got close to these levels either before, during, or after 2001's dot-com recession. Despite the dot-com bust, which was weighing on the stock market for 3 years, The lowest the expectations index got was 69.6 in March of 2003 after 2 brutal years of job losses and then a jobless recovery right afterward. So Americans know the employment situation is pretty grim. And we've got all the statistics that back it up suggesting that the shift to the flat part of the beverage curve is taking place from no hiring and no firing to no hiring and some firing as Amazon is doing. And it has been more than enough, despite the lack of widespread layoffs, it has been more than enough to raise unemployment in the US and around the rest of the world. But just in the US, focusing on the United States right now, the unemployment problem has grown substantially just over the last year, even though the official unemployment rate seems like it had plateaued before the last couple of months. And it's been this way for a couple of years, but most people largely missed it thanks to the combination of Jay Powell, the NASDAQ, and the payroll reports. None of those had accurately represented forgot how to grow, unlike what was really happening in Amazon's workforce counts. Plus, as the official unemployment rate was rising modestly from right after the banking crisis in 2023, and that's another key signal and pivot that ties back to SVB and Credit Suisse that everybody forgets about. But economists in the media and Powell, all of them wrongly claimed that was just the red-hot labor market and the red-hot recovery cooling off as the economy normalized. Except by the start of 2024, Americans were dropping out of the labor force by tens and even hundreds of thousands. So once again, the unemployment rate wasn't actually picking up and measuring the true state of the labor market and the health of the economy. And those labor force dropouts are why the unemployment rate seemed to just stop rising in the middle of the last year. So when you account for those poor souls and not just ignore people who give up looking for work because there's no work for them to have, the adjusted unemployment rate has been rising the entire time. And it exploded higher this summer and now sits above 5% for August, which is the last numbers we have because of the government shutdown. And that increase in actual unemployment has happened despite mass layoffs being relatively sparse. Instead, the lack of hiring has been more than enough to force millions to unemployment and even out of the labor force. And just putting the numbers on it, since the Fed started cutting rates last September, the number of officially unemployed, as designated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, increased by just about 500,000 through August of 2025. But the number of labor force dropouts who really should be included in the official count exploded by a little over 1 million. So the entire time, because there weren't persistent huge job cuts from the biggest corporate names, Jay Powell got away with saying the labor market was strong, and everyone, especially at the stock market, just nodded along because the illusion, this lie, is always more fun. The stock market does not represent the economy. Share prices tell us nothing about the state of macroeconomics or the monetary system. It is all simply a mirage. Stocks trade on other factors. They don't trade on fundamentals. And this is a global problem too. Unemployment has been rising nearly everywhere despite the missing mass layoffs. The no hiring, some firing economy has been slowly pushing even official unemployment rates in places noticeably higher. In the UK, for example, despite the Bank of England's constant focus on tariff inflation and the constant hawkishness among the committee, the official jobless rate there rose to 4.8%, a new 4-year high. And outside of 2020 and 2021, it's the most since the end of 2016. Even down in the miracle economy of Australia, the country was just hit with an utter shock of its own. Its official unemployment rate jumped to 4.5% from 4.3%, which it had been at the 3 months prior. That's an almost 4-year high down in Australia and a 0.5 percentage point increase from last September. And like the UK, there aren't widespread layoffs down under either. Just no one isn't hiring. The entire world forgot how to hire and grow. Except, as we see with Amazon, no one forgot how to hire. The economies didn't forget how to grow. They all made a mistake about 2021 in the first half of 2022. The forgot how to grow dynamic is simply trying to correct that mistake and doing so in a way that is not familiar to most people. You use the term recession, what they hear is layoffs. That's what the public is led to believe. But the truth is unemployment comes from lack of hiring first and foremost. And so the entire global economy has been trying to correct from the mistakes of the supply shock and the price illusion by simply freezing staff levels roughly where they were years ago, just like we see with Amazon. While that might work on an individual company basis, The effect on the overall economy is eventually forgot how to hire only further erodes the economic foundation more and more through time. Forgot how to grow begins to remember how to contract. Thus, no hiring, no firing gets to become no hiring, some firing, and if it keeps going further, it becomes zero hiring and a lot of firing, the flat beverage curve. So in the absence of government data on the condition of the labor market, we keep getting confirmation about the real state of everything regardless. So what we got today is Amazon's going to lay off a bunch of workers and use the cover of AI because of course they are. But the truth is Amazon has been the poster child of the forgot how to grow and forgot how to hire dynamic this entire time. And now it seems to be leading us into the remember how to do worse, the remember how to fire, remembering the flat part of the beverage curve. And remember, this degradation in labor market conditions is also very much related to what we're seeing in credit markets and even liquidity like the repo facility. Went over those details yesterday in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.